In the gloomy halls of medieval England, an invisible law was born, and it bound the lives of women for 8 centuries. It was called coverture, literally meaning covering, but in reality, it was a legal veil that completely obscured the existence of the wife. When she stepped onto the altar, spoke her vows. From that moment on, the woman not only gave her hand to her husband, but also gave her body, property, children, and even her very self to be legally recognized as belonging to him. Legal scholars of that time, such as William Blackstone, affirmed in marriage, husband and wife are one person in law, and that person is the husband. From those seemingly dry words, a horrific reality took shape. Women disappeared from the legal system. No longer ownership, no longer freedom, no longer even the chance to protect their own bodies. Behind the delicate lace curtains, behind the luxurious red brick houses of the Victorian era, was a legal hell where violence, coercion, and silence were considered the duty of a wife. And this story is the truth hidden beneath the fard of civilization and morality of English society for hundreds of years. In the year 1827, in London, Caroline Norton, a 19-year-old young woman, beautiful, intelligent, granddaughter of the famous playwright Richard Brinsley Sheridan, entered into marriage with George Norton, a member of Parliament and lawyer. She was expected to have a life of sufficiency, prestige, worthy of her family's position. But only a few years later, Caroline realized that she had disappeared, not only in love, but also in the eyes of the law. Under the law of coverture, Caroline was no longer a legal individual. Her inherited property, the income from her writing, even her private letters, all belonged to her husband. When George Norton was consumed by jealousy, he beat her cruelly. When she wished to separate, he claimed custody of their 3 young children, forbidding Caroline from seeing them again. A mother, in the eyes of the law, had no relationship whatsoever with the very children she had given birth to. Caroline painfully wrote in a letter, "I am a prisoner, and my children are the jailers who hold me captive." Caroline's story was not an exception. It was vivid proof of the cruel law that turned women into the shadow of their husbands. Women could not sign contracts, could not sue, could not own any property once married. Once they stepped through the door of marriage, it was equivalent to signing the sentence that erased their own legal existence. The 19th century, beneath the moral fard of Victorian society, within the red brick houses with elaborate curtains, was the stage for horrifying scenes. Domestic violence was not only common, it was considered the sacred right of the husband. A legal principle was widely repeated. A man could beat his wife with a stick, so long as it was no thicker than his own thumb. This was called the rule of thumb. In the eyes of society, marriage was the foundation of Christian morality. But behind that moral curtain, thousands of women lived in a legal hell, where cries were silenced by the dry clauses of the law. Even clergymen and doctors encouraged punishment. A medical book by Dr. William Acton, published in 1857, affirmed, "The wife is obliged to submit to sexual intercourse. It is the natural and sacred right of the husband." What we now call marital rape at that time was considered the wife's duty. The Diaries of Lady Colin Campbell, made public after the scandalous divorce of the year 1886, revealed a horrifying truth. Her husband, Lord Colin Campbell, had infected his wife with syphilis and still continued to force intercourse upon her. Despite her declining health, when she begged him to use measures to prevent disease, he flatly replied, "Such things are an insult to my manhood." While noble women were imprisoned in luxurious houses, the working class endured even harsher misery. Many female labourers were forced to hand over their entire wages to their husbands. That hard-earned money quickly vanished in drink, and then they were beaten for failing to provide a proper meal. In Wales, some miners stripped their wives naked, whipping them with leather straps as if they were animals, all while society turned a blind eye. Even the sacred role of motherhood became a chain. The child born belonged entirely to the father. The mother had no legal bond whatsoever with her own child. If separated, the husband could forbid his wife from ever seeing her children again. If the wife died, the husband had the right to sell the children, give them away, or even send them to forced labour. Parliamentary investigation records of the 1860s documented horrific cases. Some fathers sold their 9-year-old daughters into brothels, and the mother was utterly powerless. Alongside this deprivation, Victorian medicine lent its hand to the law with so-called scientific theories. They declared that women were inherently weak, that ovarian psychology made them incapable of reason. Those who resisted, read too much, or refused sexual submission could be diagnosed with hysteria and locked away in asylums. Indeed, Dr. Isaac Baker Brown performed thousands of operations removing female sexual organs, claiming it was the cure for rebellion and independent desire. In that picture, we see a society proud to call itself civilized. Yet it turned marriage into a prison, a legal prison, where brick walls and tiled roofs were not meant to shelter, but to confine. And women, whether aristocratic or common, were prisoners without sentence, without release date. In that bleak picture, there were still small flames that flared up, illuminating the darkness of the law of coverture. And one of the pioneering flames was Caroline Norton. After being stripped of custody of her children, Caroline fell into despair. But from that pain, she began to write. With her natural literary talent, Caroline produced a series of articles, pamphlets, and especially the book, The Separation of Mother and Child by the Law of Custody of Infants, considered a powerful indictment against unjust laws. With a sharp pen and tear-soaked experience, Caroline exposed the truth. Thousands of mothers lost their children, not because of fate, but because of the heartless lines of the law. Those writings shook public opinion in England. For the first time, the public had to face the dark truth, hidden behind the facade of the model Christian family. And that pressure forced Parliament to act. In the year 1839, the Custody of Infants Act was enacted, allowing the court to grant custody of children under 7 years old to the mother. If it could be proven that the father was unworthy, though only a small step forward, this was the first crack in the solid wall of coverture. Caroline did not stop. She continued to fight, campaigning for other laws, such as the Matrimonial Causes Act 1857, paving the way for civil divorce, and the Married Women's Property Act 1870 and 1882, granting married women the right to own property, inherit, and retain income from their own work. Caroline turned her personal tragedy into a force for social change. She once wrote, "I have lost my children, lost my honour, lost my youth. But if those losses can save the next generation of women, then my pain is not in vain." But Caroline was not the only woman who dared to resist the chains of marriage. Across the Atlantic, Frances Wright, an American reformer, chose an even bolder path. She openly rejected marriage. Wright declared that she would never place herself in the position of a man's legal slave. She lived openly with her lover, bore children out of wedlock, an act considered a shocking scandal at the time. But for Wright, it was a declaration, "I would rather endure the scorn of society than sign the sentence that binds my soul." Those solitary voices gradually connected into a larger wave. By the latter half of the 19th century, the first wave of feminism was formed. focusing on women's legal and political rights. From drawing rooms where ladies gathered to read, to public meetings packed with hundreds of working women, a message rang out. Women would no longer accept being covered. Another proof of hidden resistance lay in the secret networks of working-class women. In the East End of London, desperate mothers set up underground tunnels, chains of safe houses where abused women could hide with their children. They helped each other escape, shared food, and protected one another from their husband's pursuit. Even without the protection of the law, they created a law of humanity within their communities. In addition, some aristocratic families sought ways around the law. Wealthy fathers, fearing their daughters might marry irresponsible men, established trusts so that their daughters' property would not be seized by their husbands. This was only a solution for the upper classes, but it showed that even the aristocracy recognized the injustice of coverture. However, every change had its price. Women who dared to escape marriage were regarded by society as fallen women. They lost honor, lost their place in the community, were cast out by their families. Many fell into poverty and loneliness, but they accepted it all. For the most important thing, freedom was finally in their hands. Caroline Norton once exclaimed, "I am poor. I am scorned. I am alone, but I am no longer a slave." By the 1870s, English public opinion could no longer ignore the flood of articles, diaries, and women's testimonies. The stories of violence, coercion, and the destruction of coverture spread across Europe and America. This laid the foundation for the next struggles for the right to vote, the right to education, the right to work. And thus, from the screams buried within closed rooms, a women's liberation movement raised its voice publicly in the square. Today, when we walk along the peaceful streets of London, pausing before the red brick Victorian houses, we often think of a refined society, splendid drawing rooms, elegant afternoon teas, couples in lavish wedding attire preserved in faded silver photographs. But behind that velvet curtain once existed a horrifying truth. Millions of women lived their entire lives as shadows, erased from the law, stripped of the right to motherhood, the right to property, the right to live as a human being. Coverture turned marriage into a life sentence, where the wife had no day of pardon. Beneath the glittering veneer of Christian morality and Victorian civilization existed a legal hell, where violence was called duty, and silence was considered virtue. It was the women who dared to resist, from Caroline Norton, Frances Wright, to the thousands of nameless mothers in the slums who opened the first door, allowing the light of justice to enter that darkened room. They paid with their children, their honor, even their lives, so that the next generation could stand up and say, "I am no longer property. I am a human being." And perhaps the greatest lesson Coverture leaves us is not only the outrage at the injustices of the past, but also the warning that a society can wear the mask of civilization, while at the same time perfecting the art of cruelty. Behind the lace curtains of history, we see a terrifying truth, that progress and oppression can walk side by side, coexisting within the same room.